It had taken all day, but Mel was sure she had finally managed to get her message across. Communicating in hand sign was slow, imprecise work, especially when you only had one arm to do it with. Then factor in that they seemed to have different meanings for each gesture for added confusion. The whole session had turned into full-body charades for both of them. Thankfully, Tom had returned with food from the mall and had untied Belter. Otherwise, the ridiculous communication dance would have been impossible. Tom had even fashioned a Spirosaurus for the tiny creature while out during his hunt, which had made her nervous about arming it at first. But it seemed much more friendly after accepting the gift, so Mel couldn't really complain. The best news was that Belter could help them. As far as Mel could tell, he knew of a place where they could contact others that was relatively nearby. She knew it was a civilized location because the creature constantly pointed and referred to the keys hanging from Tom's belt. Some sort of outpost facility, or even a small border town perhaps? Belter was clearly some sort of outcast or hermit. He had indicated that he lived in the wilderness back where they had come from, upstream. Typical of fickle luck, perhaps if she and Tom had headed upstream instead, they would be safe and warm by now. He had been tracking them because he had seen their life pod land, but unfortunately when asked, Darmstadt, he had seen no signs of any others. Mel was glad to think that the ordeal was nearly over to give it any more thought. Tom considered their new situation from the back of the group early the next morning. Impossibly, by the time he had returned with the river creature yesterday, Mel and the Wok were deep in conversation via crude miming. He had suspected the creature was intelligent when he first saw it wore a tool belt, but to actually talk with it without a communicator was miraculous. He was suddenly very grateful for Mel's ability. He would have had no idea where to even start. He still didn't. He could only talk to Belter through Mel's miming. More fortunately, the Wok wasn't hostile. Tom was sure that after everything it had been through, there would be some resentment, but no. It was friendly enough and accommodating all their questions. Perhaps he was just grateful to have its spear back. And it agreed to help them get back to civilization. He had expected directions at best, but it seemed Belter was on some sort of resupply run himself, and could show them in person. There was still one question unanswered, however. Why had Belter tried to steal from him? Tom understood being nervous to call out to and approach bigger beings, but it didn't explain why it wanted his keys, or trying to snatch them away in the night. Something there didn't add up. He couldn't ask the Wok about it because he had not told Mel. He didn't want to alarm her. She had slept through that first meeting. And he didn't want to offend Belter either. He and Mel still needed his help. He would just have to keep an eye on him. The day passed quickly and without incident as the three of them followed Belter through the forest, away from the river. Tom was starting to think he and Mel would never be able to find their way back to its banks without the stout little Wok, when they crested a ridge, and a new sight lay before them. Belter paused, making sounds and gestured forwards with his spear at a small snow-covered building, in the middle of a treeless depression visible in the distance. Civilization. If they could keep up the pace, they should just about make it by nightfall. Belter could not be more happy with the way things had turned out. He hadn't been eaten. Instead, he was received like a guest once he signalled that he wouldn't fight or flee. They had fed him from their own kill, and even tread down his spear for him. His initial guess had been half right. They were only just intelligent. The big one able to talk in childlike, quiet talk hunt sign, and the smaller pink one too dumb to achieve even that. But they were not hostile in the slightest. It turned out that the Nod Trolls, Mill and Hom, were looking for God Rocks too. Well, one specific one anyway, the Clan Stone. The gathering point for all the local clans every summer solstice to trade news and daughters. The biggest God Rock to ever fall, and if the stories were to be believed, how his people first learned of precious metal, able to pry small amounts of it off its surfaces. Belter didn't understand why they sought it in winter, but it didn't matter and he didn't really care. All that mattered was that they agreed to give him the stolen metal in exchange for being taken to it. Mel looked at the ancient crashed courier shuttle in disbelief. So, this was Belter's idea of civilization. She should have known better than to get her hopes up. The wreck looked to be in a bad way. The entire nose end was crumpled, and there was almost no paint or other markings of the lichen-covered, weather-beaten hull. As she examined the angle it protruded from the ground at, Mel realised that the clearing in which they all stood was in fact an old impact crater. It must have hit rather hard. She hoped his original crew were okay, wherever they were. It looked old, like it had been part of the landscape for centuries. Spying a half-snow-buried airlock door, she began rummaging through her uniform pockets. Old tissue, nope. Pocket knife, Mel had forgotten she had that, but nope. Staff pass card. It took a few swipes, but the door wheezed open, forcing Mel back a pace as it released a puff of dry, stale air. The interior was untouched by the wilderness or looters. Grimly, the exoskeletons of its last crew were still strapped into crash couches, so long gone they looked beyond the verge of collapsing to dust. But Mel pushed on to the object of her desire. She found it under the chair of the co-pilot, an unassuming box with few controls. Praying like she had never prayed before, she flipped a switch. A weak green light lit up, and Mel grabbed the receiver and began talking with an emergency controller somewhere in the nearby sector. Why was he accusing her of a hoax? What did he mean the graceful leap had crashed decades ago, lost with all hands? It had been just over a week at most. With a start, Mel realised she had no idea how long the lifeboat had kept them asleep after the incident. It had burned after landing. It was quite possible it had been damaged or malfunctioned. She and Tom were saved, but everything and everyone they knew and loved was gone. Except each other. Tom looked around the old ship while Mel called for help. It seemed that this ship was from the old days, back when humans moved and traded freely across the galaxy. It must be ancient then. He knew this because the storage bay was full of boxes marked in faded English. A quick look in some of the broken open ones revealed rusted consumer goods still in their packaging. Still, at least they had proper shelter from the elements while they waited for pickup. The first sign something wasn't right was when Mel collapsed with a sob. The second sign was when he realised the wok had vanished without a trace. Belter hummed happily to himself, and he headed home with a purposeful stride. He was just wondering if the Nod Trolls would honour their deal and give him the medal when Mill opened the clan stone. Impossible! He would not have believed it if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. More curious than ever before, he cautiously followed them inside. It was full of bones and precious metals. It must be their den. How had no one known this before now? It was about to back out slowly when he realised the Nod Trolls were both distracted. An opportunity to get back what had been stolen from his clan territory had arisen. Beltar looked at the large chunk of metal the size of his head that he carried under one arm. It was big enough to make several knives and spearheads, and had 2 holes in it, so it would not be easy to pry apart. It made everything he had endured the past few days worth it. Still humming, he disappeared into the frozen forest carrying the half-rusted toaster, and dreaming of the fame and fortune that were now his. 2 days later. Tom walked up the boarding ramp of the emergency services shuttle with the biggest grin on his face. While waiting for rescue, Mel's traumatizing discovery meant only one thing to him. He was years late for work. And somehow that was just ridiculously funny. What did a few lost years mean to someone without a family? Not much. He had never settled down anywhere for long, so it wasn't like he had many assets to lose. Okay, so he would miss a few of his work friends, but that happened every time he got posted to a new location anyway. Mel had it worse. She was fine health-wise. She had been able to scavenge a few old pain relief tablets from the ancient shuttle, and the medics were seen to her arm now, but everyone she knew had been on board the Graceful Leap. Maybe he could help her out. Find a job. With not much to do since the Wok left, he and Mel had chatted away their time together. It turns out she had been a bartender on the ship as her primary role in the pleasure cruise liner. And in his experience as a specialist security guard, diplomatic entourages could definitely use a drink slinger among their number, especially longer missions. Doubly so if the recipient ambassador was a species that had no concept of alcohol. But Tom realised he was getting ahead of himself. He would have to renegotiate his own holiday first. This one hadn't turned out quite as expected.